So they have to attack it again. The division of Samuel D. Sturgis will now go forward. Not with General Sturgis, without him. General Sturgis is actually blind drunk at this point and trying desperately to hold up the wall of a barn. His brigadiers, there's two of them. One of them is sharing the canteen with him. The other one gives a great speech in which he says, men, I'm going to lead you into this battle, and when the bullets are the thickest, that's where I'll be. And according to the brigade survivors, no one saw him after he said that speech. So they virtually went in without leadership, no division or brigade commanders. Regimental commanders were making the decisions. And as a result, they weren't well coordinated and fell apart. So this brings us to the next question. 2:30, everything's done on the south end of the battlefield. Why did Burnside attack Stonewall at 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock when he can't win? Why does he do that? Is he really that one-dimensional as a commander? Because up to this point, he hasn't shown us anything that's been one-dimensional. So why does he lose it now? That's been the normal answer. But part of this is that every Union attack that went forward has gotten crushed. You can see the detritus here. Most of the survivors took shelter in the middle of the field in a swale, a tiny little ripple in the ground, where they couldn't go forward. They also couldn't get back. The units become inextricably mixed. There's no leadership there. Nobody's in command. There is no unit cohesion whatsoever. It's just fractured elements of personnel. And they are trapped less than 250 yards away from the most aggressive Confederate offensive officer of all time, Robert E. Lee. There becomes an overwhelming, real paranoid fear at this point that the Confederates will know how vulnerable the men are in the swale, will be easy to counterattack, sweep them out of that, drive them into the city where chaos will ensue, or worse, into the river and destroy the entire right wing of the Union Army. It becomes imperative now to make sure that Robert E. Lee does not counterattack. You have to keep him on his side of the stone wall. And the only way that Burnside can think to do that is not to surrender the initiative. So he takes all of his reserves from across the river and funnels them directly into the attacks against Marye's Heights. In truth, at 2 o'clock, the entire right wing of the Union Army is right here in the swale. In the city behind them was less than a brigade. There was about 1,500 men that haven't been engaged, period. So that's why we've gone to a crisis in which Burnside acts strongly, sends the Union Fifth Corps into a series of attacks, trading time, trading lives for time, changing the objective from attack this spot so that you can win with Franklin to now attack this spot so that we can survive this day and get this army off this field and fight another day. He wasn't able to fulfill his first objective, but he did fulfill his second or newer objective. So he traded lives for the life of the army. He's not the first one to do it. He's not going to be the last one to do it. What we can give him high marks for is recognizing the crisis before Lee did and coming up with an antidote, no matter how costly it is. The downside is he created the crisis. He overcommitted himself out of Fredericksburg. He should have left a bigger reserve in the city so that he didn't walk into a situation like this that cost him. Casualties, the Union Army lost 13,000 men at Fredericksburg. Confederates, a little under 5,000. Between the two actions, there are 9,000 casualties on either end. So this isn't any bloodier than the southern end of the battlefield. There are 9,000 losses on the southern end of the field. There are 9,000 losses on the northern end of the battlefield. But this is the one we become fixated on because of the division of casualties. On the southern end of the field, it's 5,000 Federal casualties to 4,000 Confederates, 1-to-1, and pretty close to testifying at how that really teetered into balance. On the northern end of the field, 9,000 casualties, only 1,000 are Confederate. Those ensconced behind a stone wall at the bottom of this picture or behind earthworks on Marye's Heights were truly protected. The Federals crossing open field lost 8,000 men. Didn't get within 50 yards of that position. The lesson to draw out of this, that these men take away from it, is protection is a marvelous military multiplier. They have been disgusted with the idea of fighting behind cover, fighting in trenches. It was considered unmanly to the 19th century soldier, but they're changing their mind now. If you have a stone wall, use it. If you don't have a stone wall, make one. And if you don't have stone, you throw dirt. And all of a sudden, we're going to see hasty field fortifications become part of the culture of these armies in the East because of the dramatic, one-sided nature of the north end of this field. Coming out of this, what do we get? Strategically, Abraham Lincoln needed a victory. He didn't get it. Of all his field armies, Grant didn't capture Vicksburg, and Sherman was out and out defeated at Chickasaw Bayou. Rosecrans wins a Pyrrhic victory at Murfreesboro or Stones River. It's just tenuous enough that Lincoln will say that Rosecrans has saved the Republic because they could not endure another setback. But it's Fredericksburg that drew the most scrutiny, in which even Lincoln admitted, if there's a place worse than hell, I am in it. But does it change anything? On January 1st, he still signs the Emancipation Proclamation. He still goes forward with this revolution, this change in ideology. So it didn't stop him. It didn't prevent it. Jefferson Davis, who insisted that Fredericksburg had to be defended because it had valuable foodstuffs and raw materials that had not been visited by the war and needed to be protected. By making Lee stay here and fight, made sure that Lee could win, but could not be exploitive. He could not make a decisive victory out of it. He could only hurt the Union Army as long as the Union Army was willing to be hurt. But it could escape at any time, and did on December 15th. And Lee was frustrated by his easiest, most resounding victory because it wasn't decisive. Jefferson Davis wanted those resources protected. According to a person who was very close to Robert E. Lee after the war, a man named William Wise, said that to the president, the corn crops between the Rappahannock and the Annas was more important than the decisive victory. So now that you've protected them, how well did that corn crop hold up? Well, the Confederates ate it all and it was gone in 3 weeks. As for the city of Fredericksburg, it was destroyed. And so the resources that had to be protected were the resources that were destroyed by that commitment. Strategically, doesn't change anything. Operationally, Ambrose Burnside comes up with the worst embarrassment, the most dramatic setback the Army has ever had. He'll be relinquishing command in mid-January. He will be the second shortest tenured commander of a U.S. Army. He'll have his job for 77 days before he's ousted. The shortest tenured was John Pope. He had it 70 days, so he beat John Pope by a week. Tactically, you learn about earthworks, you learn about crossings. From here on out, they don't cross at cities. They don't cross anywhere that they don't command both banks. They establish bridgeheads before bridges. They realize the importance of putting protection around guns, gun pits, earthworks. But they've also created an entire culture of creativity where artillerists and infantrymen like General Barksdale downtown or Colonel E. Porter Alexander here at Marie's Heights, they get a lot of free rein to use exactly their influence. For the Union Army, many of them are pretty discouraged by this. But it's interesting, the culture. Their army doesn't collapse in defeat, it grows stronger. And that rarely happens. The unifying effect here is this field. When they went into that field, they fought for many different purposes. They fought to restore the Union, they fought to abolish slavery, they fought for the honor of their town, or even their side of the street. But when they walk off this field, they're discouraged and angry and bitter, and they're no longer under the illusion this war is going to end anytime soon. They have to steel themselves for that. So what they fight for now is revenge. They want to erase the stigma of this. One Union officer wrote to his wife after this battle, "I don't know what the politicians propose to do now, and I don't care. I'm telling you this. I want to give those rebels one thorough good licking before anyone even talks of peace. And for that, I will go through a great deal." That's the buy-in. That's the conviction. It doesn't talk about the outcome of the war. It talks about one licking to erase this stigma. That's the vendetta that actually seals and congeals this army. From here on out, they're going to be unbeatable. They only grow stronger in defeat. The man who wrote those words, "I will go through a great deal," was George Gordon Meade. He'll command this army in 6 months, and he'll take them to Gettysburg, and it's his conviction, along with theirs, that will lead them to victory and start them on the road to redemption. And we'll have that conviction that will chase Robert E. Lee all the way to Appomattox Courthouse, because it's born here. Robert E. Lee draws some wrong inferences from here. His most resounding victory, and he drew the wrong conclusion. He didn't focus on Prospect Hill, he focused on this Stonewall, and the easiest victory he ever had. He believed his men were unstoppable, they were unbeatable. And in fact, it leads them into some rash and foolhardy decisions in the future, attacks just like this one at Gettysburg with Pickett's charge. Now, there's numerous military explanations we can give you for Pickett's charge, but the most visceral answer was Lee's own, when he just blurted out, "I thought my men were invincible." But think about the Army of Northern Virginia and every battle it's ever been in, from the 7 Days to Cedar Mountain, to Second Manassas, to Maryland, to Fredericksburg, to Chancellorsville, all leading into that. And there's not one of those battles where the Confederate losses haven't been egregiously high. They've never been invincible. They barely survived some of their own greatest successes. There's only one spot on one field where they've ever been so insulated that they could feel invincible. It was behind this stone wall. So he didn't look at the southern end of the field where the losses were 1-to-1. He reads the statistics and the experience on the north end, and it creates a culture that's going to change the mindset. And that's really the legacy of Fredericksburg. Fredericksburg didn't change the war, but it changes the people who will change the war. It will change George Gordon Meade. It will change Robert E. Lee. It will change their perceptions and their actions. I think one of the most interesting and revealing things I've ever seen is that in April 1865, immediately following the surrender at Appomattox, George Meade and Robert E. Lee met. They were friends before the war. And once they got back together and socialized, they only spoke about one battle out of this entire war. And it wasn't Gettysburg. They talked about Fredericksburg. And I think that's pretty revealing, because it changes Robert E. Lee. It makes him a dynamic commander in that a resounding victory. It solidifies his place as the preeminent commander and as the high, literally the living embodiment of the Southern Confederacy. But it also sets George Meade on the course of rising and becoming a more effective commander. He's the only Union commander that succeeded at Fredericksburg. He became noteworthy. And from that moment out, nobody ever forgot the major general that was commanding the smallest division. He was an up-and-coming man. So Fredericksburg changes the men who will change the war. Thanks.
On behalf of the Officer Secretary of Defense, I'd like to present this coin to Mr. O'Reilly. He will be here for those of you that have questions. We can take questions right now if you have them. I know that we're running a bit late. Really appreciate your attendance. The next presentation in the historical series is on the 4th of February, the Emancipation Proclamation. Thank you. Questions for Mr. O'Reilly, please come forward.
Sorry about that.
No, it was very good.